with executive vision. I've heard kind of vignettes also at this conference for the past couple days about how stakeholders come to us with, they want data, they already have a solution kind of worked out. So perhaps what they are wanting is not really aligning with what you think your data science team should be working on. The fourth bullet point, every conference, every session I've been to at this conference has talked about this thus far. Defining the problem you're trying to solve often gets overlooked or not succinctly stated. I'm seeing like head nods in the room right now. I feel like we should maybe have some workshops on problem definition since it seems to be such a problem. That was a little bit of a joke, actually. The problem statement is the problem. Sorry, it's after lunch. Okay, so data science work might get misaligned with customer needs. I actually talked with the CEO of one of our sister companies in Boston. It was probably about a month ago. And I was talking to him about, how do you really make data science work for your company? What does that mean for you? How do you function, align yourself, structure? And he said that his data scientists go directly to the customer and actually develop the model with the customer. I thought that was really interesting. That's not a model that we have currently at Axial. We're kind of a few layers back from our end user. So I thought that was kind of a compelling structure to have. And I think when you are a few layers back, the risk of your work kind of being misaligned with their needs is more likely to happen. Next, defining how data science solutions are better than the current solutions is often very difficult. Oftentimes, particularly in the context of healthcare, how many of you work in healthcare? Okay, most of you. So I think in healthcare, a lot of times companies, even if they can define their problem, they have something they want to do, and perhaps it's already being done, like the job is already being done. So how is a predictive model or any other type of data science model better than how it's being done already? Really sitting down and thinking about that, I think, is critical to the success of the adoptability of your model. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think data science is a wide discipline, but I don't think that teams are often structured to be successful. They might lack certain resources in terms of data warehousing, technical deployment of models and kind of what that looks like. So we'll talk a little bit about team structure and kind of what that looks like. Anyone else from the audience have some other challenges around data science that you all can think of or have experienced or seen? Yes. Uh-huh. Sure. Right. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that at the panel this morning. So one thing I thought that was interesting was the comment was made that, my data scientist has spent 9 months increasing the accuracy of this model from 97% to 98%. And an executive in the audience raised his hand and said, what kind of person works for 9 months increasing the accuracy of their model 1%? I kind of agree with him, but I think what's important to understand from the employee point of view is that data scientists, often that's how they judge themselves. That's how they know they're doing a good job, is if the validation measures for that model are increasingly better, then they see themselves as valuable. The business looks at value of a data science team through a very different lens. So I think it's important to kind of shepherd your data science team through understanding how are you going to be judged, how is your work going to be judged through the lens of your CIO, your CEO, whomever, your end user also, right? They will want very different things than 1% increase in accuracy. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Anyone else? Okay. All right, defining data science. What is data science? What is data science to everyone in the audience? No takers? Okay. I think the data science, honestly, is still inventing itself. I think we are asking generally a lot of data scientists. The students I have tell me often that they kind of feel pretty overwhelmed about the amount of things they have to know, from business acumen to modeling, to not violating specific data assumptions, to all of the tech stack that's out there. They have to know advanced SQL, they have to know deployment strategies. It's kind of like the whole gamut. So I think, in my opinion, I hope that data science actually gets a little more specific and more specialized as the discipline kind of grows and matures. But I don't think that's where we're at right now. So in my opinion, data science is primarily about developing, testing, validating, and deploying algorithmic prediction models. I think it goes way beyond that, but I think a lot of people would define data science as a predictive capability that's kind of added on top of the analytics capabilities that they already have. I think that data science can be thought of as a longer-term capital investment for a company. That doesn't mean that we can't demonstrate value of the models, but I do think the mindset of companies really should be that it is a capital investment. So not expecting that we're going to see very large returns on the investment that we're making in personnel and infrastructure. I think data science provides data-driven insights, but they should be different than kind of contextual knowledge of what's going on. Otherwise, we're not really making an impact anywhere. I'll give an example in healthcare, since most of us are in healthcare. If a physician or a nurse has to make a decision about whether an individual is going to develop sepsis, if your model doesn't do better than the contextual experiential knowledge of the physician, then there's really no value there. So I think we have to really demonstrate how that complements kind of already understood contextual knowledge, and that's really the power of data-driven things. I do think it can cause some discomfort, because when the data suggests something very different than what we already think to be true, I believe that can cause some discomfort, particularly within the healthcare space. I do believe data science can provide a competitive advantage over market solutions. If you can define how your model is better and doing a job better than it's currently being done, then that's your competitive advantage for your model. I wrote data science is not, because we often say, what is data science? But what is data science not? What is data science not to you all? It's not artificial intelligence? Okay, good. Anyone else? It's not perfect. Wow, yes, absolutely. All models are, what is the, some are useful. Yes, thank you. Yes, you were going to add something. What is data science not? Yes, it's not a silver bullet, I agree. Anyone else? It's options. I was talking to someone this morning. Has anyone read the book Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke? No one? Okay. It's not a data science book, but it's a book about decision making and how humans kind of naturally are very comfortable with yes, no, or 0, 1. And naturally, we are very uncomfortable with kind of the gray areas in between. So it's kind of tangential to that comment. Anybody else? Okay, I wrote data science is not validating a priori conclusions. If you already have something you think to be true, data science does not work to use data to support that if it's really not true. Development of descriptive measures, I kind of struggle with this because I do think a big part of data science is, of course, feature building and doing kind of all of the 90% of the work that you have to do in order to prepare your data for modeling. But I think if your business is at a point where you're making descriptive measures, which in and of itself is quite valuable to a business, then you probably aren't ready for a data science capability, in my opinion. So means, medians, descriptive statistics, development of specific metrics, I think can be handled primarily with a little more traditional healthcare analytics team. Data science is not coders. I think sometimes data science teams do have that reputation. Okay, who has seen this McKinsey article? 1, 2, anybody? Eric, come on. You've not seen this? You plugged some McKinsey earlier. So this is an amazing brief that was put out by McKinsey and Company. I can't remember what year, actually. An Executive's Guide to AI, just the title alone is pretty amazing. I have used this article to actually guide some of the ways that I communicate to our executive team and sort of how I define data science at Axial. I would really encourage anyone to take a look at this. Just a quick Google search of the title will lead you here, but I'm happy to share these slides with a link afterwards. This article really kind of lays out the business case for data science and provides some very specific examples of different algorithms and what types of business case that they are supposed to be used for. I think it's super useful. So this is kind of example. This is by no means exhaustive, but the McKinsey article kind of does things like this. It lays out different terms. So unsupervised learning, supervised learning, what is it? How do you interpret it? What is the business use case? And examples of techniques that fall under that umbrella. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but one thing we've done at Axial is create kind of a data dictionary of different terms and kind of what they mean in sort of business layman's language. I think stuff like that can be really impactful if you can use data science terms and match them with specific words that your business uses, your account management uses, your clients use, then it can really make data science a lot more accessible for your business and your users. Okay, so this is my kind of token slide that I see very often about maturing analytics capabilities at your company. This has been talked about many times before. Have you all seen other specific sessions that sort of talked about maturing analytics? Yes, okay. I think these slides are very impactful because I think they really tell a story of how analytics and data science really grows and matures at a company. I do believe that sometimes people are scared potentially to really go through this process and think that they have to have the fancy AI and machine learning that sort of comes along with a more mature company. But in actuality, there's really a ton of value that can be realized by staying in the standard reporting area, at least for a while, right? Until you can kind of get your data science strategy together, know where you're going, know what problems you're trying to solve. There's really a lot of learning and value that happens kind of on the front end of this graph. And I think it really rings true to how companies should mature their function from a data science perspective at their company. Okay, so I think we would all probably agree, maybe not, that data science gets a lot of hype. Can I use that word, hype? Maybe I'm too old for that. But I do think there's a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of really an expectation that I'm going to hire some PhD data scientists. They're going to come in. They're going to have fancy computers. They've got a lot of textbooks with like equations in them and stuff, and they're just going to work magic. I think that's being sort of torn down a little bit, maybe. And I think that because of articles that have come out like this, Stop Explaining Black Box Machine Learning Models for High Stakes Decisions. I really enjoyed that. It was a perspective piece that came out recently. And really kind of the impetus for that article was, within high stakes decision making, which I think we often encounter in healthcare, and also like in the prison system, for example, you have to be really confident in your model because you're potentially affecting people's lives in some cases. In some cases not. For examples like, perhaps we're wanting to do screening for certain diseases. So we predict that you might have a propensity for X disease and we're just wanting to screen you. Perhaps that's not quite as high stakes as someone who is perhaps denied parole. So I think there's some opinion pieces and articles that are really coming out to kind of shed light on, what are really the specific limitations of data science modeling and how it's used kind of out in the wild beyond, a peer-reviewed publication. Okay, when is data science needed at your company and why? Anyone want to share their perspective at your company? When was data science sort of come into play, and why was the decision made? First of all, who has a data science function at their company? Okay, like kind of only a few people actually. Okay, well, I think, first of all, when you've defined what you're trying to do and the problems that you're trying to solve, I feel strongly that data science is a tool in the toolbox. It's not the silver bullet. It's a capability that companies, I believe, make a strategic and disciplined decision to invest in, because it is an investment. And I think once you have matured to the point where you have very defined business objectives and problems you're trying to solve, and you're pretty confident that complex algorithmic modeling is a tool that you need in order to solve those problems now and in the future, is when it's most appropriate to start growing a data science capability. I think when you have a data science strategy, and what is a data science strategy? It's kind of a broad term, but I think it's kind of overall choices and what you want to do. Do you want to specialize in certain models? Are you wanting to be like NLP focused? What types of competencies and skill sets do you need? How much can you invest? What is the potential return on that investment? I think once you have those things lined out, then you're probably ready to start the process of investing in data science. I wrote here, when you have a stable data structure, would love to hear some perspectives on that, but I think, in my experience, data science is very sensitive to fast changes in data architecture, to the point where it kind of makes our jobs very difficult. So I think having fairly baked in kind of data architecture and warehousing is really a necessary component before you really start investing in your data science team. Is there any other perspectives from the audience on that? Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So defining your problems that you're trying to solve, and then I would agree. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When and why? I would agree. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. I mean, I don't want to talk myself out of a job, but I don't think data science is the right answer for all problems. Now, that might not be true 20 years from now. You know, of course. You know, I heard someone say recently, they were developing like a bot for physicians to like talk into, and then that would give like a specific recommendation for some pharmaceuticals or certain diagnoses. And the lady made the comment that, you know, there was adoptability issues, and she was like, oh yeah, but you know, 10 years from now, doctors won't even practice without having some sort of artificial intelligence at their disposal. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but it's interesting to think about, you know, down the road, is this something that will just be so ubiquitous? I mean, it kind of is now, right? Maybe not within the healthcare space, but certainly in like entertainment. I mean, we all know that Amazon makes recommendations, and I've been a sucker for buying what's been recommended to me, and I know how they do that, right? So yeah, I agree, if it's needed, absolutely. Okay. Does this mean you can't lead with data science? No, it doesn't, but you really have to have sort of data focus, culture, and strategy to begin with. I do know companies that are successful that have kind of led with data science. Yeah, I mean, you just have to, like, if that's your bread and butter, and you sort of lead with that and know that that's what you do. Even data science for as a service type companies kind of lead with that. So I think it can happen, but if you are not already, if you are an already established company and you don't have that functionality, I think that you have to really go through this process of analytics maturity before you can be successful. I also put when you're ready to start taking risks. I do think the use of more complex algorithmic solutions at least has the perception of being a little bit risky. It's a little bit out of the box. It's different than how it's being done. That's going to, maybe cause some people to kind of pull back a little bit. So when your company is really ready to start taking a little bit of risk within what you're trying to do, I think it's the right time to at least think about including data science. Okay, maturing data science at your company. What skills do you need? We often hear things like coding skills, making models, SQL, visualization, graphing skills. But what's missing? What are we missing within data science curriculums? What are we missing when we start building and kind of fostering our data science teams? I think business-minded thinkers and communicators, data translators, to give props to Eric for that. Data scientists who understand where their company's data science maturity is and build to their current needs. I think this kind of gets to your point. I don't think that every problem that's given to a data science team requires a data science solution, whatever that might mean. So I think it's important for your data science team to not always offer, a 30-layer neural net. If the potential solution is a descriptive statistic and that's valuable, then offer that. Ways to articulate the value of data science artifacts. I know this is something that I've struggled with over the years. As data scientists work and create, what gets created? Our Markdown gets created. Google Docs with graphs in them. Different dashboards. Emails get circulated. How do we kind of collect all of that information? The last panel that I went to talked about how Vanderbilt has 25,000 different reports, and there's like all this stuff, but it's just kind of stuff. It's not really very meaningful. Oh yeah, you're in the audience. Yes, this is more reports than employees. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting and common problem. Like, you really do have all of these artifacts that get created. And how do you sort of cohesively put those together into value? I think it's very difficult. Okay, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'll often get asked, I think we all do, what's the difference between a healthcare analyst and a data scientist? I think, to me, the biggest thing is prediction. If your employee can really do the more complex modeling, then that employee is probably more in the data science realm. A data analyst or a healthcare analyst often does like data summaries, reporting dashboards, business intelligence. SQL's probably missing from up here, different visualization. Once you start getting into experimentation, so hypothesis testing with the data, predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics, then you're more moving into a data science functionality at that point. Yeah? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of data scientists, and I can't tell you how often they don't really tell me a story of their project. They really jump into, this is the scikit-learn package that I used. And I don't personally really care much about that. Like, I can teach someone to code. I think it's something that's missing. I think you have to, as a leader, identify those gaps and foster that and grow that within your team, because I think that more traditional programs, even sometimes PhD programs, don't really teach you those types of skills. I do think one thing that is very interesting about PhD data scientists that I don't think exists in other types of trained data scientists is that any PhD person who has written a grant to the NIH will tell you that the grant is 15 pages, but you spend the bulk of your time on the first page, the one page, called the specific aims page. And you pore over it, you pore over every word, you really define very succinctly this is what I'm trying to do, this is the aims of my research, and you just sink all of your time, because sometimes that's all your reviewers actually read. So I do believe that there's one often overlooked skill of a PhD data scientist, and that is problem definition. They are very good at that. They're very good at writing that specific aims page. And I think that's something that we're kind of missing. So that's a skill that you, I believe, have to foster within your team. I think what you're talking about really spans both a data analyst and a data scientist. Those more softer communication skills, other types of things that I'm sure we'll talk about in other slides. But yes, I agree that's missing from this slide. Okay. So create a culture of data science at your company, if it's missing, right? One thing that I talked about a little bit earlier was creating a data science one-pager. So when your stakeholders come to you and they ask for things like, what is the accuracy of your model, their definition of what they think accuracy is might not be the mathematical definition of accuracy from the confusion matrix, right? So kind of bridging that gap and making sure that when you say an accuracy and they want accuracy, that you mean the same type of accuracy. So we have created a one-pager for all of those different types of terms. I think it's definitely been helpful. We've also included really basic words like algorithm. Like, what's an algorithm? A lot of times your account management team or your product team, the word algorithm might be kind of new to them. So really helping them understand what those words mean is actually really important. I think ensuring that there's avenues to incorporating data outputs into your products is really important. I talked a little bit earlier about data science being kind of a few levels back from sort of the end user. I do think the closer your data scientists are to the people who are using your model and communicating about it, the better. I think speaking about your work in a language that's familiar to your business. So if you're talking with your CEO, I think a common piece of advice I hear is understand what's important to your CEO. What's important might be revenue, could be pipeline. How does your team's work actually feed into those things and enhance them, and talk about your work in that context so that it will resonate? Let's see, what else did I have up here? I think the last bullet point that I want to mention, which I think is important for companies who might be kind of struggling with their data science function, is if your company doesn't have a data science strategy, step up and offer a plan to them. Kind of take some of these learnings, take things that you read, the McKinsey Article, and kind of step up to the plate and say, hey, I realize there's a gap here. I'm going to offer a plan, potentially to kind of help out. And I think that can really resonate with stakeholders. Okay, how to create business-minded data scientists. So we've all seen that Venn diagram. I didn't put it up here, but of like what are the skills needed for data scientists. I think that's getting old and outdated. So I think business acumen is often forgotten in some of those diagrams. So the number one goal of business is usually making money. I mean, it's kind of boils down to that sometimes. So think in terms of revenue costs and optimize toward that. Should I perform regression that might take 3 to 6 weeks versus a neural net that might take 3 to 6 months? I think you have to weigh those things when you're kind of lining out what are your data science projects going to be, how do they add value, what is needed within the business, what is potentially the value of the longer term project. I'm not saying your data scientists shouldn't spend 9 months increasing the accuracy 1%, but in the very least understand how that impacts the business. That might impact the business a lot. Defining that, I think, is really important before you send your data scientist off to the basement for 9 months. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I think exposing them to the business and creating a dialogue around projects that is focused on return on investment, perhaps not what is publishable. I think we've kind of struggled with this, and actually remember a very distinct story when I had first started at Axial. We were talking about making a continuous variable categorical, like in buckets. And everyone was like all aghast, and we never do that. Like, you totally lose any kind of meaning within the variable if you do that. But the reality is sometimes that in order to get a physician or some type of end user to use your model, you might have to do that, and it might not be what you would choose to publish in a paper, but it might really be a discriminating factor over whether your model is valuable in the market or not. Okay. Yeah, help your data scientists understand that complexity is not always, or maybe even sometimes rarely, useful. I hate to say rarely, but I do think that's an important thing. When you're evaluating what you're trying to accomplish within the business, always think about, do I really need a non-model solution for this problem, potentially? And encouraging them to also use the same language as the business, which we've touched on already. So I came up with, this is certainly not correct for every business, but I think when you're developing a data science strategy for the business itself, especially if you're a small business, thinking about what does data science look like when my business is 1 to 50 employees, 51 to 250 employees, and then kind of on up from there. And I really just chose these buckets kind of at random. But I really think mapping out the strategy is really important if you are charged with kind of leading data science at your company, because your CEO is probably not thinking about this. But your CEO is going to expect some type of return on the investment for your team. So this is certainly just kind of quickly what I came up with, but I think there can be variations on this. So I do think when you're a young company, having a healthcare analytics function that's very strong, very fundamental is really the way to go. And then your data science capability comes along with a little bit more mature company. I really took a shot at sort of understanding from a revenue or let's say expenditure standpoint, kind of what percentage of a total company's budget should be data science. How many in the room have ever really thought about that? Thought about how much your company spends annually and how much your data science team? Okay, great. Do you know a percentage of what your expenditures are for like data science / R&D? Uh-huh. 0.5%, okay. Yeah. Right, okay, that's low to me, but every company's a little bit different. Anyone else, like percentage of total company expenditures? Yes. 0.2%? Wow, sub 1% for everyone. I feel really bad about putting 2 to 7% over here. Yes. 10 to 12%, great, thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, well, when I was a PhD student and kind of worked in academic research, I was mostly familiar with the pharmaceutical industry. Big pharma is totally different than what I work with now, but I've typically seen R&D budgets along like the 25% range for those types of companies, so that was kind of my baseline. I do think a company like Axial probably has a lower percentage, much lower than a quarter of their total operating expenditures devoted to like a data science R&D function. But I do think that it's important to think about, like what does your company do and sort of what percentage and proportion of total financial investment is your company investing into data science? And what are they potentially getting out of that for the investments? So I put on some roles here. We'll go over kind of how to structure teams here in a moment, but I think having subject matter experts, data translators, model builders, data engineers who are kind of more technical in nature, if you're cloud-based, people who really know AWS services very well, can deploy those services kind of securely to your team, I think is really important. Analytical-oriented product leaders, I think, is also very critical. If you're going to have kind of layers between your data science function and your end user, if your product person is sort of the mediator there, having very analytically minded people in those roles who really understand data science and understand the value, I think is really critical. I think we'll kind of skip this slide. I think it's just something to think about, when you're kind of designing your data science team. How does your company use data science? At Axial, we use data science and analytics within our products. Not every company is like that. I've definitely talked with companies who use data science for kind of internal optimization of their company. So it depends on kind of what you want to use it for, but thinking about the life cycle of specific projects is really critical when you're kind of building out those roles. I think we'll actually skip this slide because we've went over most of those things. Okay, I think we'll skip to this. So maturing your data science capability. I think this is kind of getting to your point, Randy, about what are the skill sets that we're missing on that other slide. These are, I think, are some of the things that you should look for and kind of think about when you're trying to mature your data science function and sort of integrate it a little bit more with the business. I think, I like to say anybody can build a model. That's not really true, but writing code to build a model is really not the biggest hurdle to, I think, being a high-performing data scientist. I like to think about high-performance behaviors like being a good listener, knowing how to influence, being a problem solver. Are these some of the things you were thinking about, Randy? Doesn't always provide a data science model solution. I think this can actually help, even when maybe a data science model would be appropriate. If your company's kind of struggling to adopt that function, kind of offering some other types of solutions that are a little more comfortable and kind of easing into things really might make sense. Don't start with your neural net. Do some regression at first, kind of ease people into it. I think high-performance behaviors also include being ambassadors of the company, really kind of understanding what the company does and sort of shepherding that and those values throughout everything they do. They're passionate and positive and take some ownership and accountability. I think these things are things that we kind of often miss kind of within the interview process as well, and probably a little more along the lines of what you were thinking on the last slide there, Randy. I do think these are not specific to data scientists. I just want to make that clear. I think anyone in any kind of role who's a high performer probably has a lot of these attributes. I think, what success looks like for your team. We try to think beyond a list of outputs in a database. I think sometimes it's easy to sort of get caught up in the excitement of building models and it works and it's great. And here I'm done. I have some code in GitHub and I've got some markdown and I've got a list of numbers in a database and I'm done. And it actually really goes way beyond that. I'm not saying users don't care about the number, but they care about what the number means to them and how they can use that number. And I think it has to be, how do you give it to them or show them how to use that number that adds value to their workflow, that helps their patients. To use another industry example that helps change a pump in a manufacturing plant before it goes bad and you don't have any downtime in the plant. So, stuff like that, thinking beyond the number in the database, I think is really important. And how do you communicate your results in a way that everyone understands? Another story I'll tell, when I first came to Axial, I actually made a pie chart. Don't make fun of me because pie charts are kind of, they're not really in vogue. But I made a simple pie chart, and it was not well received. Like, they came back and they said the client just didn't understand what this pie chart was, and I was really upset. But understand that not everyone responds to a graph. Like, I don't like pie charts either, but I was trying to show percentages of different populations, and it seemed logical to make a pie chart. Not everyone responds to graphs. We have a funny story at Axial that histograms are actually called mountain graphs. I did not give them that name, obviously. But I think graphs can be not very consumable to users. So it's important to think about. You as a data scientist might really respond to that. Not everyone does. So think about how you communicate your results to a really broad audience. You have a lot of different experiences and talents than your data science team. Okay. All right, so this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. How do you assemble a team and scale? I think putting the right people in the right places at the right time is extremely important when you're thinking about growing and maturing data science. So I think things like data analyst, business analyst is really kind of what you need first. Then you can start adding data scientists and machine learning engineers. These are people who develop the analytical solutions. Your first people are people who help define your business problem for you. Then I saw this interesting, I got this from a link, this idea of like a data journalist, which is kind of similar to the data translator, so I thought that was an interesting name. So kind of putting everything in the right context for the user. So data journalists are really more about communicating the solution, and then it goes on to your more technical kind of DevOps functions of technical deployment solutions and scaling. I think it's really very challenging to know kind of when to add these specific functions and when. But we were talking earlier about kind of investing in data science and knowing exactly what you need to support that specific function. There's a laundry list of roles right here. If I hired all of these roles today, it would be a very large investment for the company. But I feel that for data science to really truly be successful and realize, you really do need all of the skill sets that these different types of roles offer. So it really kind of puts it into context and makes it real for your executive team and your leadership who's making decisions, and your CFO say, hey, in order to really make this successful, I need this. And this is going to be, I don't know, $1 million annual investment for the company. Okay. So I think this is a really interesting slide, and I'll kind of end with this. So let me go to the next slide, actually. So about a couple of years ago, I was put under a senior VP of analytics who is a really great boss to me. He's really taught me a lot during my time at Axial. And I remember he had never run a data science team. And I remember the first week that I worked for him, I sat in his office, and he said, Lindsey, your projects and potentially offering solutions that are kind of already there that we can repurpose. So our target objective is, 25% of our projects need to have that attribute. The next one, we'll kind of go down. Okay, the first one on productivity, I think is interesting. Conversion rate of innovation pipeline. This is something that we've at least attempted to do at Axial. We do have kind of an idea pipeline of things that we're sort of going through. So what is our fail rates? We're offering ideas to the business about solving problems. We want to potentially fail fast. So the conversion rate of our ideas that we offer to the business is maybe, let's say, it could be like 2%, 5%, 10%. I agree. So the question, I think I used this example earlier. So if my model predicts the likelihood of a disease outcome, let's say it's addiction to opioids, and I say, okay, these people are going to develop the addiction, and we are going to intervene, and our intervention, whatever it is, costs $1,000. But if they don't convert or develop the addiction, we know that on average, those patients spend about $10,000 in healthcare expenditures in treating their addiction. So if I do something based on the output of the model, and those individuals don't end up getting an addiction, I could say, well, I have potentially saved, $10,000 per patient. Well, $9,000 because minus the cost of the intervention, right? So you do have to be very diligent about how you measure and sort of get the data back circularly to say that yes, I've done this thing and our model had that impact. Anyone else? Okay. We are almost out of time. I just had one slide. It wouldn't be complete without a Dilbert comic around data. But thank you so much. Any questions or comments about what we've talked about today? Yes.
How does your team interact with or partner with a more traditional data warehousing and BI stack? Like, how do you parse value that you found in the model deploy and get that into a format that most customers are going to see via a more traditional reporting platform or something? If they don't, how do you
I'll tell you the way we do it. I'm not saying the way we do it is perfect by any means, because I think there's a myriad of technical tools to kind of help with that. But the data science team at Axial is really responsible for running models for most clients each month.